you been to Colorado? If you've been to Colorado, you might have had something called a Runza or a Kraut Burger. Many people from Germany settled in Colorado, and they brought with them some secret treats, and I'm going to share that with you today. I lived in Colorado for 10 years. This was a big delicacy there. Most people don't know about it here, so hopefully you'll be interested and give it a try at home. Okay, what I have in my skillet, I have 1 pound of ground beef, and I have about 3 onions, medium onions, and I want to break my ground beef up, and I'm making a filling for what is a Kraut Burger, and my filling for my Kraut Burger is basically going to be cabbage, which is not sauerkraut, to say that it's not kraut, and fresh onions and this meat. Now what I want to do is I don't want to add my cabbage right now, because if I added my cabbage, what I would get is boiled meat. I would like to get my meat a little bit caramelized so that it browns. I went ahead and added my onions in here. Okay. So I'm cooking my ground beef and my onions, and I want it to caramelize. I wanted to make sure that I brown my ground beef. If I boiled it, I'm not going to get quite the flavor and the brown caramelized color that I want. So I'm going to let the water evaporate. You can see I'm getting a sauna right here, right in front of the stove. Okay? And what I'm going to do is brown my ground beef and onions. I'm going to go ahead and add some salt and pepper to that. Okay? But not too much. I want my flavors to come through. And eventually when this is all done, I'm going to go ahead and add some flour. So the closest you could find to a comparison with a Kraut Burger is it's sort of like a cabbage and beef calzone, I guess you could call it. Okay. So I'm browning my ground beef, and as I'm doing that, I could be adding other ingredients. I can add cheese to this. I could add broccoli. I could add any other vegetable I wanted, but I'm going for the purest Kraut Burger. If you go to Colorado, there's a restaurant that serves these, and it's a bit of a chain, and it's a local chain, and they're very, very popular. So most people would think of sauerkraut in this. To make sauerkraut, basically you would take cabbage and put salt in it and let it sit for several weeks in a barrel. This has nothing to do with that. Okay, it's not sauerkraut. Now, when I'm serving this, I'm going to put this together. You could serve it with a brown gravy, or you could serve it with some German mustard, and you can serve it kind of lukewarm or hot. Traditionally, what we did in Colorado was serve it with brown gravy hot. Okay, now my beef is pretty close to being browned, so I'm going to go ahead and add my cabbage. The cabbage is going to cook down quite a bit, so I used 1 large head of cabbage. I want to get that cabbage flavor in there. I used a food processor to go ahead and to shred my cabbage, but you could certainly cut it with a knife. If I have a few big pieces in there, that's okay. I'm going to stir my cabbage around so that I'm getting the maximum amount of evaporation of that water, because it's going to get quite watery at this point. Don't be alarmed by that. That's all right. What you need to do is just let that cabbage cook down, and once the cabbage cooks down, then you will be able to thicken it and we'll be all set. Great. Now look how brown our Kraut Burger mixture is. We have all that brown caramelized color, and that means flavor, folks. It's all going to be good. And what I want to do is, even as it's cooking in the oven, I want to add a little bit of flour, as I said earlier, because I do not want it to get all watery on me. You want something to cool down, whether you're putting soup away in the refrigerator or you're putting a dish, a casserole that you can actually mix before you put it in the refrigerator. I want this to cool, because if I start putting it into my cold dough or my room temperature dough, it's actually going to start cooking my dough. Here's a neat trick for you. Just put in ice cubes. I do not want it to be hot also, because I don't want to burn myself. Call me strange. Now, I'm going to take my dough, and I've got a little melted butter right here. And at this point, we start doing fingers. It's all the messy fun stuff. This is great for your kids if you like to do something with your kids. So I'm going to take my dough, which I've made previously, and I'm just going to take a piece of it, any size I want, and I'm going to spread it out. You want these to be relatively bready, so you do not want to spread it out too thin. Okay? And I want to make sure I have my knife, because when I put my calzone together, I'm going to go ahead and put a slit in the top because I do want steam to escape. There is still some water on this cabbage, even though it looks like it's cooked. So you want to make sure that your steam can escape. Otherwise, the thing could explode in the oven, and that would not be good. Not so good at all. Okay, so I've got my mixture all cooled. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a large scoop, and it depends on the size of piece of dough you use. This makes about 8 Kraut Burgers, right in the middle. Make sure you get a lot of filling in there. You don't want it to leak everywhere, but you don't want the filling to be around the edges, okay? You want the filling right in the middle. Now, if you wanted a meatier Kraut Burger, you could certainly add less cabbage. This is quite a cabbagey Kraut Burger. I'm going for stressing the fruits and vegetables, so we're going with that. So all I'm going to do then, if I were gathering a calzone, I would do the same thing. I'm going to gather all the sides together, okay, and all of the edges, and I'm going to have almost like a purse effect. I'm going to turn it under, and look, it's beautiful. It's going to be large and possibly good for a person to share. If you're having a big game, this would be a great treat for you. Okay, so I've made my 1 Kraut Burger. I want to put at least 1 slit in the top to let steam escape. I could make it pretty and put a couple slits. And it'll bake like that, and that would be good. Again, I'll show you one more time how to do this. Now, if you were cooking for a crowd, you didn't want to make individual lovely little morsels like that. You could take your dough, roll it out into a big pan. I could use this particular pan. It has sides, which is great. I could roll my dough out to the bottom. I could put my filling right in, and then I could put another piece of dough on top, and I can make a great big pan of it, bake it, and then I could actually cut it into squares, and that would give you a great big pan. But for tonight, there's only me and my honey, so we're going to have Kraut Burgers, and we're going to have them individual. Okay. So again, I want a pretty generous scoop of my filling inside the center. You don't need to use a rolling pin for this job. It works out really well. Okay, and a nice generous scoop. Gather the edges like this. You can see what I'm doing, just gathering them all together, folding them under, turning it over, and I have a large calzone. I could definitely make this for 2 or 1 person with a very large appetite. You really want the dough to brown, so I'm going to go ahead and take a little butter, and I've got a small spoon here. You could take a brush, and I'm going to spoon a little of this butter onto the top. It gives us nice flavor. It's going to give us nice browning, and it's going to look very shiny, so that's good. Also, you could use egg wash if you'd like to, but butter tastes good, so I'm going for that. Get a little bit of a salty bite at the very first bite also. Okay, and that is a Kraut Burger. I'm going to pop these in the oven, and when we come back, we'll get to eat these. Now, I can serve it with the brown gravy, like I said, like they do in Colorado, or I could serve it with a nice mustard sauce. See you in a bit. Now our Kraut Burgers are all done, and they're nice and golden brown. You can see my little hole that I made is looking rather decorative. And I'm going to pull these off. And if I wanted to, I could cut this open, and I could cut it in 4ths, and I can serve it that way. So I think I'm going to do that just to show you what it looks like on the inside. You can see my dough is nice and flaky. It's golden brown. And my filling is not falling everywhere, because if you remember, I put that nice flour in there. And if you can see, it's delicious. The cabbage smells wonderful. It's all caramelized, and the meat is ready to go. I'm serving mine with a little mustard, but again, you could serve it with the brown gravy. And you can serve it into wedges, like a pie, or you could put it into slices if you had a roll. And that is a calzone. No, wrong. That is a Kraut Burger. It only looks like a calzone. So we have a lot of apples in my house. We picked a lot of apples. I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. one of my favorite things to do is to get some hors d'oeuvres made with some apples. I like to keep hors d'oeuvres in the freezer in case all of my good friends come by and visit me. So I'm going to teach you a little bit of a quick hors d'oeuvre, only 3 ingredients, but mighty good, okay? It's called an apple blue cheese puff. If you didn't have blue cheese, you could use goat cheese. You could use any kind of cheese. In fact, if you didn't have apples, you could use pineapple or whatever fruit you'd like. But apples are in season, so we're going with it. I'm using a frozen puff pastry dough. If one wants to make a homemade puff pastry dough, that could take several hours. It would be delicious, but I think this is just as good. So I'm going to take, this is 1 sheet. I'm going to take my puff pastry dough. It's folded into 3. I'm just going to cut it into those 3 folds. It's a little soft. You need, if you have frozen puff pastry dough, you need to have it thawed. You cannot start from frozen. And I want these about a 3-inch square. So I'm going to get maybe 12 from 1 sheet. And I'll show you how you can work that out if you just cut it unevenly. So this is just 1 little sheet of puff pastry. Luckily enough, it stretches, so you can make it any shape you want. Now, if I wanted to make this into a triangle or a turnover, I could do that by just folding over the corner. I'd like to make a little purse. I think it's kind of fun looking. So I'm going to take some blue cheese, crumbled blue cheese, and I'm going to put a little bit of blue cheese, and I'm going to put a little bit of apple. I've cut my apple in tiny pieces, and I have coated it with lemon juice so it doesn't turn brown. It has a little bit of brown to it. That's just oxidation. It will not hurt you at all. You really want your apple cut small. I use Macintosh apples because they're in season, but you could use any apple you wanted, a Granny Smith. Now, if you can see my fingers, the secret to this is we're going to gather it into a little purse. So I'm going to gather the 4 corners up. Okay, and one thing you don't want to do is overfill your purse. I'm gathering the 4 corners up. I'm pinching it at the top, if you can see, and I'm turning it into a puff. If you have holes, you can take a little piece of the dough and patch the hole. No problem. And there's 1. Now, if I make a bunch of these, I can freeze them uncooked, which is a great trick. And then when you want to have your company, you freeze them uncooked, and then when you want your company to come, you can invite them, pull them out, and there you are. You have a nice little appetizer. Okay. So again, you could make this into a triangle. You could make it into the shape you want. Blue cheese, apple. I'm gathering my 4 corners together, and I'm making like kind of a little purse. And I've greased my cookie sheet. Now, puff pastry has quite a lot of fat in it, but that's okay. It's going to stick anyway. You really, really want to grease your pan. In case that the apples leak, you might get some syrup coming out. Hopefully they don't, but you don't want your pan, you don't want to be scrubbing apple juice from your pan, especially caramelized apple juice. So I'm going to continue making a few of these to show you what they look like. And they're pretty quick. And that was about as easy as you can get. If you had pie dough, you could certainly use that. There's that refrigerated stuff that some people like to use in the refrigerator section. I hear rumor that that's pretty good with this also. But I would never do such a thing because I make puff pastry, like puff pastry better. But you could. Okay, so I'm gathering my 4 corners, apples, blue cheese, and then I'm going to take these. I'm going to make just 4. I only have 4 friends today. Pop them in the oven, and we're going to pull them out in a little bit, and we'll have golden brown little apple blue cheese purses. See you in a bit. So we have our puffs here, and so a couple of them are leaked, but that's okay. It gives you the good smells that you want in the kitchen. You can see how they've browned really nicely. They're light and delicate, but lots of butter, so not for health food people. All right, so these are great. They are nice and golden brown. You want to see the bottom of just a little bit light brown. You don't need to brown them too much. Underdone, of course, is not good. But if you have a little bit of cheese leaked on the edge, just cut it off. That won't hurt anybody. Okay. And you can actually take these then and freeze them at this point. And they would freeze nicely, and you can reheat them, which is fun. or you can eat them. Now, if I were you, I would recommend that you wait for a couple seconds or a couple minutes at least to let these cool, because they're really, really hot. And you wouldn't want to burn the mouths of your guests, because the cheese is hot and the puff pastry has a lot of butter in it, which gets very hot. Now, if you wanted to do a large one of these, you could certainly do that and cut it up, but the puff pastry doesn't work as well that way. I kind of like the individual ones. And you can see how nicely they turned out. They're nice and golden brown, and they're ready for my guests. Today we're making a 3-onion soup. Onions are one of those vegetables that are available in the fall, and there are various kinds of onions. I've got 3 different kinds. I have a leek, I have green onions, and I have some white onions or yellow onions, and I have both mixed in here. And I've pre-caramelized my onions because we're making soup, and to do that you need to cook these at least probably an hour. So I've taken my leeks and I have caramelized my leeks and my onions, but not my green onions, and I'll show you why in a little bit. And I've caramelized them so they're nice and brown and moist, and they have cooked down, and you wouldn't believe the smell in this kitchen. It's wonderful. Okay. So I've got those on the stove, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with the green onions. I'm just going to go ahead and slice these green onions. They've all been washed. And I'm not going to brown my green onions because I don't really want them to caramelize. And that's going to give the soup a lovely fresh flavor and green color. I'm going to save a few for the top, but I want to cook my green onions. Each of the onions have a different twist. Like a leek would be a little sweeter, the yellow onion would be a little stronger, and the green onion would have yet a little different flavor. You can use any kind of onions you have, cipollini onions, red, even white or yellow, any color you've got. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut all of the way to the green for these green onions. And I'm going to cut them rather large because they're going to cook down. I like the green color in the soup. And I don't need to brown these as such or caramelize them. Okay, I'm going to take our green onion and we're going to put it right in here so we keep that nice fresh color. It'll give us a slightly different flavor. It's starting to look pretty in here. I'm going to saute them just a little bit so that they get mixed in. They're delicate, so you don't really need to cook them for a long, long time. Pretty that is. That looks really nice. Okay. Now I'm going to add some garlic cloves, and I'm going to give those a minute to cook in. And that's just going to give our broth a richer flavor. When we caramelize the onions, it's also going to give the broth a nice deep color. So we're going to give that just a minute. Now I'll tell you what the rest of the ingredients I'm going to put in are. I've got some bay leaves, which are basically a laurel leaf, and you put a couple of those in. We're going to remove them at the end. Some thyme, you can use dry thyme or you can use fresh thyme. Sprinkle of that in. And I'm going to put a little salt in, but I'm going to be careful. I don't want to put too much salt or pepper in here, just a little bit, and I'm going to taste it before I let it simmer. Sometimes broth can be a little salty. So I'm going to add some sherry wine to this. You want to add a nice dry white wine that you might drink. I like to add some chicken and beef broth to my onion soup because I think it gives this a nice flavor. So I'm adding both chicken and beef. Now, if you are a vegetarian, you could certainly use vegetable broth, and that would be delicious. I like vegetable broth a lot because vegetable broth has lots more flavor than either beef or chicken. Okay. Vegetable broth has all the flavor that you would add to a roast or a chicken, but it's already in the broth. You can see where my soup is getting nice and liquid, and the onions are nice and thin, and I'm seeing my green onions. And this is not going to take too long after this to simmer. I'm going to let it simmer for about a half an hour. And I'm going to then revisit it. And we're just going to go ahead and let this simmer. It's not really going to thicken as such, but I do want to leave the lid off because I do want the excess water to evaporate. Once the excess water is evaporated and the flavors are all melted, we'll revisit the soup and come back, and I'll show you how to serve it. Now, to make some toast, to make the French onion soup look just like it does in the restaurant, only easier, I'll show you a little trick. When you get the onion soup at a restaurant, you have to pull all the cheese off the bowl and everything. Well, this makes it easier. Hate to waste all that cheese sticking to the bowl. So we're going to make some toasts. So I'm going to take some French baguettes, and I'm going to cut them into relatively thick slices without smashing the bread. And you can broil this, or you can bake it. I'm going to go ahead and bake mine. Okay. If you had toasted baguettes or you had leftover bread, you could certainly use any kind of bread you had. What I find is nice to use is bagels. Bagels are great in here. Or any kind of croutons you had would work. And I am going to slice my bread, and I'm going to bake it in the oven. So it's going to toast the bread, but you're not going to have all the mess of all of the cheese melting everywhere. And then I'm just going to put the bread like that into the soup. And it's actually going to enable me to use any bowl, so you don't have to have an oven-safe bowl to do that with. So what I have is I have some Swiss cheese here. You could use Gruyere, which would be tasty. And I have a little Parmesan cheese. I like that mixture because the Parmesan cheese has a little bit of a sharper flavor and a salty bite to it. Okay. And I'm mixing those. And I'm just going to sprinkle them on my bread. I like a lot of cheese, so I'm piling pretty high. And I'm just going to pop these in the oven, and it's going to take 5 minutes. And when we take these out, we'll serve our soup, and we'll have French onion soup. So we're serving our onion soup. You can see how it turned out. All our onions are nice and tender. Our soup is thickened. It's actually, the liquid has been cut in half, so all the water has evaporated and we reduced the broth. And the beauty of doing it this way with the toast on top is that you don't have to have an oven-safe bowl, and you don't have to scrape all the onions and the cheese off the top. And you can see where my toasts have turned out really nice and brown and beautiful with my Parmesan cheese and Swiss cheese on top. And I'm going to go ahead and float a couple of these right on top. And there you have it, French onion soup without the mess. So you might have all had hummus, which is a Mideastern dip, but I'm not sure how many of you had baba ganoush. There's probably lots of ways to pronounce it, but it's made with a roasted eggplant, much the same ingredients, and a mixture called tahini, which is an actual sesame paste. So it's ground up sesame seeds, some cumin, some lemon juice, some olive oil, salt and pepper, and it's all put together in the food processor or a blender. And then I'm going to go ahead and pour it into this bowl, and I'm going to drizzle a little olive oil on top, and we're going to serve it with some pita chips in a little bit as soon as that's ready. So I've got these eggplants. Now I took the eggplant and I cut it in half, and I put some salt on it, and I just roast it in the oven in a little olive oil for about an hour. And it ends up looking not so pretty, but boy, is that good. It's got all that caramelized goodness. You can see all the brown spots. That's good. I don't want the skin of the eggplant in my mixture. So the skin, this is nice and cold, which is nice. The skin comes right off pretty easily. And I'm scraping my eggplant into the food processor. If a little skin gets in, that's okay. We don't want the skin. It comes off really easily. It's nice and cold. If you had just roasted it, I would recommend you let this cool a little bit because it's very hot. But we're just going to scrape the skin out. We just put the skin aside. And you can use the seeds and all. When you put salt on an eggplant, it actually takes the bitterness out. Some people don't like eggplant because it tastes bitter. Right now it's going to taste really sweet. It doesn't look real pretty, but it has lots and lots of natural sugar in it, and eggplants are prevalent this time of year. Last eggplant, you can see all that caramelized color, that brownness. That means the sugar in the eggplants come out. It's cooked, and it's going to be tender and good for you. You're not going to recognize the eggplant when we're all done with it. Okay. The next thing I'm going to add to this are 3 cloves of garlic. Now, I don't need to chop my garlic because my food processor is going to do my job for me. And then I'm going to add that tahini I was telling you about, which is a sesame paste. There's the oil part, and then this is the solid part because the oil separates. It's delicious. It makes a nice dressing as well. Adds nice toasted flavor. If you wanted to use a food processor, you could actually make your own tahini if you didn't want to buy it. Put the sesame seeds right in the food processor, turn it on, and it would process those. The other thing that's going to make this taste really good is some lemon juice. The more lemon juice you have, the better. It's delicious. And I'm going to go ahead and add some cumin, but you could spice this any way you want. You could make it spicy with some hot chilies. You could actually even add some mint, which is traditional. Some salt and pepper, even though we've salted those eggplants. Okay. And a little bit of olive oil. So I'm going to put some olive oil in my mixture. I'm going to add a little bit of my chopped parsley to the mixture so that I get some nice parsley bits in there. So I'm going to put my food processor together, make noise for just a minute. Now what I have here is I have a little bit of water so that if my food processor is not moving, I can add a little bit of water and that can get it going. I'm going to check the texture. Perfect. There we go. See how good that looks? I'm going to drizzle a little bit of my olive oil on top, and I can still see that parsley in there. A little parsley on top. And there you have it. I'm going to serve with that with pita chips in just a few minutes. Baba Ganoush.